The cold wind screamed across the endless white land of Antarctica. The sky was gray, heavy with snow that fell in quiet waves, and the sound of machines echoed faintly in the distance. A small research camp stood there, surrounded by ice, silence, and mystery. The people inside that camp had come from different parts of the world, all united by curiosity. They were searching for signs of ancient life under the ice, but none of them could have imagined what they were about to find. Among them was Dr. Karim, a quiet man in his late 40s who had spent most of his life studying lost worlds. He was calm, patient, and deeply passionate about his work. But that winter morning, something unusual appeared on his radar screen. The machine picked up a strange, dense object deep beneath the ice. It wasn't rock, it wasn't natural. The signal was too clean, too metallic. At first, he thought it was an error in the scanner, maybe interference from the freezing weather. But as he checked again, the readings became even stronger. The shape beneath the surface was large, very large, almost the size of a small city block. He called the rest of the team. They all gathered around the monitor, staring at the strange, dark oval shape glowing on the screen. The data suggested it was buried almost half a mile below the ice. Impossible to have been placed there by humans. No aircraft, no ship. Nothing in recorded history could have ended up this deep without leaving signs of impact. After a long moment of silence, Karim spoke softly. "Whatever that is," he said, "it's been here for a very, very long time." The team began preparations to drill into the ice. Their equipment was powerful, but even so, the freezing wind and endless storms made everything difficult. Each day felt like a battle against nature itself. Still, something about that hidden shape kept them going. It wasn't just curiosity, and it was instinct. They all felt deep inside that they were standing on the edge of a discovery that could change everything. Days turned into weeks. The drilling continued around the clock, with only a few hours of rest between shifts. At last, after nearly a month of constant effort, the drill struck something solid. The sound was sharp, metal against metal. Everyone froze. The ground beneath them vibrated faintly, as if the ice itself had exhaled after a long sleep. They stopped the machines and began to clear the surface carefully by hand. What they uncovered was astonishing. Beneath the thick layers of ice was a smooth metallic wall, cold, seamless, and shining faintly even in the dim light. It was unlike any material they had seen before. It wasn't rusted or corroded, despite being buried for what must have been thousands of years. When Karim touched it with his gloved hand, a strange vibration traveled up his arm. It was gentle, like a heartbeat. He quickly pulled back, startled. For a moment, he thought he had imagined it. That night, no one slept. The storm outside grew stronger, but inside the main tent, the team argued in hushed tones. Some believed it was part of a meteor. Others thought it could be an ancient machine. A few whispered that it might not be from this world at all. Karim didn't say much. He sat quietly, staring at the frozen wall through the small window of the tent, his mind full of questions he couldn't yet answer. The next day, the team sent samples of the surrounding ice and microscopic readings of the metal to their main lab through satellite connection. Within hours, the reply came back. The ice layer surrounding the object was over 1,000,000 years old. That meant whatever they had found had been here long before human civilization even began. No aircraft, no ship, no human-made structure could exist from that time. The entire camp fell silent when they heard the results. It was as if the wind itself had stopped to listen. Word of the discovery reached higher authorities. Within days, a group of officials arrived by helicopter. They didn't speak much to the scientists, only asked for reports and took control of the area. More equipment arrived, guarded by soldiers. The research project that had once felt like a dream of discovery now became a classified operation. Karim's team was allowed to stay, but they were no longer free to share their findings with the outside world. Despite the secrecy, Karim couldn't help feeling a strange pull toward the buried object. Each time he went near it, he felt that faint vibration again, like something sleeping deep inside was slowly stirring. He began to notice small changes. The temperature around the metallic surface stayed slightly warmer than the surrounding ice. Sometimes at night, the lights in the camp flickered for no reason. Their radio equipment picked up soft, rhythmic pulses that didn't match any known signal. One evening, as Karim was recording data, he noticed something unusual. The metal seemed to emit a dim, bluish glow for just a few seconds. It faded quickly, but it was enough to make his heart race. He didn't tell anyone that night. He simply wrote in his notebook, "It's alive, or something inside is." Over the next few days, the strange pulses in the radio became stronger. They weren't random anymore. They came in repeating patterns like coded signals. The communication officer tried to decode them but failed. Then one of the technicians realized that the pattern matched an old style of naval communication, signals once used by warships to identify themselves. But the language, the sequence, and the rhythm were like nothing in any known database. The realization left everyone in shock. Could it be possible that the thing buried beneath the ice was once part of a fleet that existed before humans even learned to write? Kareem spent hours sitting beside the metallic wall, listening to the faint humming sound that now filled the air around it. It was deep, almost like breathing. The soldiers kept their distance, uneasy. Even the wind outside seemed quieter near the site, as though the entire landscape was holding its breath. On the seventh night after the signals began, a strange event occurred. The ground trembled softly. Snow drifted down from the camp's roof and the instruments started blinking erratically. One of the soldiers shouted that the temperature had risen by several degrees within minutes. The ice around the buried structure began to crack, forming long, thin lines that glowed faintly from underneath. The camp was filled with the sound of deep rumbling, slow and rhythmic like an enormous machine starting after endless silence. Panic spread quickly. People ran, grabbing their gear, shouting over the roaring wind. But Kareem stood still, watching the ice glow in the dark. He couldn't look away. In that moment, he understood that what they had found was not a simple artifact. It was something far greater, a remnant of a forgotten time, a story buried deeper than human memory. The glow faded after a few minutes, and the rumbling stopped. The camp fell into silence once again, but everyone there knew that something had changed. The buried object was no longer just resting beneath the ice. It was awake, and it had noticed them. That night, Kareem recorded a final entry in his journal. His hands trembled as he wrote the words. "We thought we found a discovery from the past," he wrote, "but maybe the past has found us." Outside, the wind howled across the frozen land. The aurora danced faintly in the distance, painting the night sky with colors that seemed too bright, too alive. Deep beneath the ice, the silent structure pulsed again, once like a heartbeat, and then all was still. No one in the camp spoke about what they saw that night. The officials warned them to stay quiet until further orders. But every person there carried the same feeling, that they had woken something ancient, something waiting. None of them could explain it, but all of them sensed the same unshakable truth. The ice no longer felt empty. Something beneath it was listening. After that strange night, no one in the camp felt the same. The discovery had changed everything. The people who once came there full of curiosity now worked in silence, avoiding eye contact, almost afraid to speak of what they saw. The memory of the glowing ice, the faint hum beneath their feet, and the vibration that felt like a heartbeat still haunted them. Dr. Kareem barely slept. He would sit alone in his tent late at night, listening to the weak radio signals that never stopped. They came in short pulses, sometimes strong, sometimes fading, as if something deep below was trying to communicate. He started recording those sounds, hoping to find a pattern. When he played them back, they seemed to carry rhythm, almost like coded words. But no matter how hard he tried, he couldn't understand their meaning. One cold morning, while the sky was covered in thick clouds, the base communication system suddenly picked up a strange signal on the global monitoring channel. The sound was clear and powerful, and it spread far beyond their small camp. Every receiver in the world, from military bases to space observatories, began to pick it up. A rhythmic pulse, repeating over and over. Scientists across the world became confused. It wasn't a distress call, not a satellite error, not even a natural sound. It was controlled, intelligent, and intentional. A few hours later, the signal disappeared completely. But what it left behind was fear. Governments started asking questions. News channels tried to cover the story, but all official sources denied knowing anything. Within a day, the transmission was labeled as a technical anomaly, and every online discussion about it mysteriously vanished. Inside the Antarctic base, the team was told to stop all communication with the outside world. 2 new officers arrived with sealed documents. They ordered everyone to hand over their research files and hard drives. The operation was now classified as highly restricted. Despite the silence around them, Kareem couldn't stop thinking about that signal. The pattern had felt familiar. Late one night, he played it again on his private recorder and stared at the sequence of dots and dashes on the screen. It reminded him of something he had studied long ago. Old naval communication systems, the kind used by warships many decades ago. But there was something different. The language used was unlike any known human language. It was older yet more complex and seemed to carry a deep structure within it, almost like music. The realization hit him slowly. What if the thing buried beneath the ice wasn't just one ship, but part of a much larger formation? A fleet. He ran to the control tent and compared the radar scans they had collected earlier. His hands shook as he overlaid the maps together. What he saw made his heart race. Several massive shapes, all positioned in a perfect circular formation, hidden deep below the surface. The structure they had uncovered was only one piece of something far greater, something that spanned miles beneath the frozen continent. Kareem called his closest assistant, showing him the data. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Finally, the assistant whispered, "It looks like a fleet at rest." Those words hung in the air. A fleet, a forgotten battle fleet buried for millions of years. The thought was almost impossible to believe. Over the next few days, strange things began to happen. The magnetic field around the base started fluctuating. Compasses spun wildly. Machines shut down without warning. At night, the ice glowed faintly again, not just in one spot, but across several locations miles apart. It looked as though the entire frozen land was breathing light. The radio signals changed too. They no longer came in short bursts, but in long, rising waves. The rhythm felt alive, almost emotional. The technicians monitoring the signals started hearing faint echoes like whispers layered beneath the static. Some said they heard a word repeating softly, though no one could agree on what it was. The atmosphere in the camp grew heavier each day. Some workers demanded to leave, saying the place was cursed. Others were too fascinated to walk away. Even the soldiers, who were trained to stay calm, began acting uneasy. They said they could feel something deep beneath the ground, like a pulse traveling through the ice, slow but powerful. One night, the aurora in the sky turned bright red and green, lighting up the entire horizon. The air felt charged with electricity. Kareem stood outside staring at the dancing lights when he noticed something strange. The beams of color were not random this time. They moved in patterns, forming circular shapes above the horizon, almost as if responding to the signals coming from below. At that very moment, the global monitoring systems picked up another burst of transmissions. The pulses spread across the planet again, but this time they carried a clear structure, a repeating sequence of numbers and tones. In one of the decoding labs far away, a scientist compared the pattern with ancient records. To his shock, the coordinates hidden in the message pointed directly to the Antarctic base. The news didn't stay hidden for long. Within hours, world leaders held private meetings. Air and naval forces were sent closer to the Southern Ocean under the excuse of training missions. Satellites were repositioned above the polar region. Something huge was happening, and only a few people truly knew the reason. Back at the camp, the ice around the metallic wall had started to melt unusually fast, even though the temperature outside was still far below freezing. The air near it felt slightly warmer, and the snow no longer stayed frozen on top of it. Kareem ran thermal scans and found something unbelievable. There was energy coming from deep within the object. It wasn't just metal reflecting heat. It was generating power. He wrote in his log that night, "If this is a ship, it still works. If this is a fleet, it's waking up." The base's generators began to malfunction as if something below was interfering with their systems. Radio equipment buzzed constantly with strange frequencies. The team members were told to stay calm, but no one could sleep properly anymore. They all felt watched, though no one could explain why. One evening, while Kareem was examining one of the ice samples, he noticed something strange under the microscope. Tiny fragments of crystal with microscopic carvings on them. They looked like symbols etched so finely that no modern tool could have made them. He realized they matched the markings faintly visible on the metallic wall. These weren't random scratches. They were part of a language, a message. He carefully cleaned one section of the metal again, brushing away the thin frost that had formed overnight. The surface revealed more markings arranged in lines almost like an inscription. He traced his gloved fingers over them, feeling a strange warmth beneath his hand. When he looked closely, he realized the symbols glowed faintly when touched, as if responding to contact. He quickly took photographs and sent them to the computer for enhancement. When the images appeared on the screen, he froze. The markings weren't decorative. They were precise, mathematical, and deliberate. Each symbol connected to the next like part of a system. He began comparing them with ancient languages and early human markings. To his shock, a few shapes resembled symbols found in ancient ruins thousands of miles away. Could there be a link between humanity's first civilizations and this buried fleet? The idea felt impossible, yet the proof was right in front of him. As days passed, the world outside grew restless. Strange weather patterns began forming around the southern hemisphere. Planes reported compass malfunctions when flying near the polar region. A few satellites went offline for unknown reasons. Though governments denied everything, scientists quietly warned that a massive magnetic shift could be occurring deep beneath the ice, something powerful enough to affect the Earth's atmosphere. Inside the camp, Kareem's team grew increasingly tense. The low hum from beneath the ground became stronger each night. It felt like standing near a giant machine preparing to start. The vibration was steady now, like a slow heartbeat echoing through the frozen earth. Then one night, the power in the entire camp went out. The generators failed, lights flickered, and everything turned silent. The only sound was the wind and the deep rhythmic pulse coming from below. The ice around the main dig site began to glow again, this time brighter than ever before. Shadows moved under the surface, long and massive, like the outlines of structures slowly shifting in the depths. The soldiers ordered everyone back, but Kareem stood frozen, his eyes wide with awe and fear. He whispered softly, "It's not a signal anymore. It's a response." The glow spread wider, pulsing in time with the strange hum, and for a brief moment the air around them felt alive. It wasn't imagination. Something ancient was stirring deep beneath their feet. As the lights faded once again, the silence that followed felt heavy and endless. No one spoke. No one moved. They all knew whatever was buried beneath the Antarctic ice was no longer sleeping. It had begun to wake. The night after the blackout felt longer than any other. The entire camp sat in darkness, surrounded by silence so thick that even the wind seemed afraid to move. Only the faint hum beneath the ground reminded everyone that they were not alone. No one spoke much that night. People stayed inside their tents, eyes open, waiting for something they couldn't describe. Dr. Kareem sat near the metallic wall with a flashlight, trying to calm his thoughts. He could still feel the vibration under the ice, slow, heavy, almost like a sleeping giant breathing below. Every few minutes the ground trembled faintly, followed by a strange low sound that came from deep inside the earth. It was neither thunder nor machinery. It sounded alive. By morning the power came back, but nothing felt normal. The lights flickered on and off, and their digital instruments showed readings that made no sense. The ground temperature had risen by 5 degrees overnight, even though the air outside was freezing cold. The magnetic readings went wild, and the radar scans showed movement. Not random shifts, but something massive, moving slowly beneath the ice. When Kareem saw the radar image, his heart pounded. The shape that had been still for weeks was now changing. It was shifting position, just slightly, as though something buried deep was beginning to stir. The team gathered around the monitor in silence. No one dared to say what they all were thinking. The soldiers tried to stay calm, but even they looked uneasy. One of the engineers whispered, "It's moving." That afternoon, the entire sky turned gray. The air pressure dropped so suddenly that everyone's ears popped. Snow began to fall in thick waves, and then the wind picked up with a roar. The camp's communication antennas were nearly bent in half by the storm. But even as nature raged outside, the sound beneath the ground grew louder, steady, pulsing, powerful. Kareem stepped outside for a moment despite the storm. The snow hit his face like needles, but he barely noticed. He looked across the white plain, where faint blue lights glowed beneath the ice in long lines stretching far beyond the camp. It looked as though the frozen land itself had veins of light running through it. The sight made his chest tighten with awe and fear. He realized something. Those glowing lines were not random cracks. They were arranged in patterns, almost like a design, From above, they might have looked like the outline of massive ships resting side by side under the surface. He rushed back to the control tent and began overlaying the satellite scans with the radar data. The result took his breath away. The glowing lines matched perfectly with the positions of the shapes detected weeks ago. Long, curved outlines like ancient vessels buried deep in the ice. It wasn't one ship. It was many. A fleet. Before he could say anything, the ground shook violently. People stumbled and grabbed whatever they could to stay upright. Tools and equipment crashed to the floor. The noise from below grew louder, a deep, rolling sound that felt like a heartbeat turning into thunder. Outside, the ice started to crack. Long fractures raced across the surface, glowing faintly blue as steam rose from them. The air filled with a strange metallic taste. The snow melted around the dig site, forming pools of dark, steaming water. The temperature around the buried structures climbed to almost above freezing, even though it was the middle of the Antarctic winter. Panic spread quickly through the camp. Soldiers shouted orders, scientists scrambled to secure their data, and some people just stood frozen watching the impossible happen. Kareem grabbed his notebook and camera, trying to document what he could. But even his hands were shaking too hard to focus. Then, through the thick fog and snow, something enormous began to rise. At first, it looked like the ground itself was lifting. Ice cracked open in massive chunks, breaking away to reveal smooth black metal underneath. The shape that emerged was taller than any building, stretching upward as the surrounding ice exploded outward. The noise was deafening, a roar mixed with the sound of shattering ice and rushing steam. Everyone backed away, shielding their faces from flying debris. A wave of hot air rushed through the camp, melting snow instantly. The lights from the rising structure were blinding, deep blue and white beams that cut through the fog like searchlights. As the fog cleared for a brief moment, Kareem finally saw it, a gigantic vessel unlike anything made by humans. It was shaped like an ancient sea ship, but far more advanced. Its surface was smooth and seamless, carved with strange markings that shimmered faintly. The entire structure looked both new and ancient at the same time, untouched by decay. The vessel hovered slightly above the ground, still partly covered in ice, as if unsure whether to rise or rest. The sound it made was low and steady, the same rhythmic hum that had haunted them for weeks. The soldiers pointed their weapons instinctively, though deep down they knew there was no use. The object was beyond anything human power could control. Then one of the technicians screamed for everyone to look at the radar. More shapes were moving. Across the frozen plain, the other buried vessels were also beginning to stir. The fleet that had slept for 1,000,000 years was waking up together. The tremors grew stronger. Sheets of ice split apart, sending massive waves of snow flying into the air. The ground beneath the camp began to collapse in places, swallowing tents and vehicles. People ran trying to escape, but the wind was too strong. The noise of the awakening fleet filled the air like an endless storm. Kareem fell to his knees, staring at the sight before him, enormous shadows lifting through the fog, one after another. Each ship glowed from within, their lights pulsing in perfect rhythm. It was as if they were communicating silently, calling to one another after ages of silence. Through the chaos, Kareem could only think one thing. This was not a random accident of nature. These ships had been waiting. Something had triggered them to rise. The storm reached its peak, and then, just as suddenly, it stopped. The wind went still, the snow hung motionless in the air, and everything became quiet. The hum continued, deeper and slower now, echoing through the icy land. In that silence, one of the ships released a beam of light into the sky. A thin, bright column that shot straight upward, piercing the clouds. It reached far beyond sight, as if sending a signal into space. The light flickered 3 times, then faded. Every communication system in the camp went dead. Radios turned to static, screens went black, and even the satellite links failed. Whatever message had been sent, it had gone far beyond human reach. As the crew slowly recovered from shock, they noticed something strange. Despite all the movement and noise, the ships hadn't attacked or caused direct harm. It was as though they were testing their systems, stretching after a long slumber. The air smelled faintly of ozone, and the snow around the site had completely melted. In its place was a wide, dark pool of water reflecting the massive ships above it. For a brief moment, the reflection looked like stars on the surface of the earth. Kareem walked closer to the edge of the pool. His heart was still racing, but his fear had turned into pure awe. He whispered to himself, "It's alive, all of it." He noticed small drones or objects like glowing orbs moving around the ships. They floated smoothly, scanning the surface, repairing small sections of the hull as if restoring what had been damaged by time. The ships themselves made no sign of aggression, just calm, methodical activity as if preparing for something. The soldiers didn't know what to do. Their orders were unclear, their equipment useless. They could only watch. One of them muttered under his breath, "If these things wanted us gone, we'd already be gone." As the night returned, the ships remained motionless above the cracked ice. The blue lights dimmed until they became soft and gentle, glowing like stars resting on the ground. Kareem sat outside his tent long after everyone else had gone inside. He couldn't stop staring at the horizon. Somewhere deep down, he felt this was only the beginning. The ships hadn't come alive by accident. They had been waiting for something. Maybe the melting ice, maybe the signals that had circled the globe, or maybe humanity itself. He wrote one last note in his journal that night. "They have awakened," he wrote, "and they are watching." As he closed his book, he heard the faint hum again, slow, steady, like a heartbeat echoing through the earth. He looked toward the ships in the distance, their lights pulsing softly under the endless sky, and he realized that whatever these vessels were, they were not strangers to this world. They belonged to it, long before humanity ever existed. And as the cold wind began to rise again, carrying the whispering sound of ice shifting beneath the ground, Kareem understood something deep and haunting. The forgotten battle fleet was no longer forgotten. It had returned from the silence of time, and the world above had no idea what was coming next. The world had changed quietly, though most people didn't yet know it. Far away from cities and crowded streets, deep in the frozen heart of Antarctica, something older than history had begun to move. After the awakening of the ships, the camp was placed under strict control. More aircraft arrived, bringing new equipment and men in black uniforms who spoke little and smiled even less. They built taller fences around the site, set up radar jammers, and placed guards on every corner. Only a few of the original scientists were allowed to remain. Dr. Kareem was one of them. He hadn't slept properly in days. His thoughts kept circling back to what he had seen. The massive vessels breaking through the ice, glowing like stars, humming like living things. He couldn't forget the sound, that deep, steady heartbeat that still seemed to echo beneath the frozen ground. The ships had stopped moving after that night. They now rested quietly above the cracked ice, their enormous shadows stretching across the white plains. But even in stillness, they felt alive. Every few hours, faint pulses of light ran across their surfaces, like veins carrying energy through a body. One morning, a helicopter brought a group of international researchers and military advisors. They carried boxes of instruments, scanners, and strange devices Kareem had never seen before. He watched them set up camp near the largest ship. The air smelled of oil and metal, and every sound, every footstep, and every engine seemed small compared to the silent presence of those ships. The first tests began within hours. They fired harmless radio waves toward the vessels, scanned their structure, and measured the energy around them. The readings came back impossible. The metal was unlike any known element. It was harder than titanium, yet somehow flexible under heat. Its outer layer seemed alive, absorbing energy instead of reflecting it. Even stranger, the symbols etched into the hulls glowed faintly whenever human touch came near, as if responding to presence. Every person who went near the ships described the same feeling, a deep vibration inside their chest, like standing close to a massive heartbeat. Later that night, Kareem sat in the control tent reviewing data when a young scientist came running in. His voice trembled as he handed over a thermal scan. "Look at this," he said softly. "It's warm inside." Kareem stared at the image. The center of the ship showed a clear heat signature, not from machinery but something that looked almost like movement. The patterns inside shifted rhythmically, as if something was flowing through the structure. It was as though the ship itself was breathing. Word spread quickly among the research teams. Some whispered that the ships weren't just machines. They were living entities, or perhaps a combination of both. The theory sounded wild, but no one could fully explain what they were seeing. The following days were filled with endless tests and confusion. Samples taken from the ships were unlike anything found on Earth. When studied under microscopes, the material seemed to heal itself. Scratches disappeared within minutes, and when exposed to light, it released a faint hum. Every answer led to more questions. The deeper they dug, the more the mystery grew. One evening, while analyzing a fragment of the ship's markings, Kareem noticed a repeating pattern. He fed the design into a computer, which began translating the geometric shapes into mathematical language. The results shocked him. The markings weren't random decorations. They were instructions, formulas, and coordinates, and hidden between those coordinates were numbers that matched ancient landmasses, places that no longer existed. Continents lost millions of years ago. The realization hit him like a wave. These markings were maps, records of a world that existed long before modern humans. He couldn't believe it. For years, scientists had debated whether advanced civilizations could have existed before recorded history, but this was proof beyond imagination. The fleet didn't belong to aliens or myth. It belonged to Earth's own forgotten past. He took his findings to the lead official overseeing the site, but the man's expression stayed cold. "Keep this confidential," he said sharply. "No word leaves this base." That night, Kareem sat alone in his tent, staring at the maps glowing on his screen. He couldn't stop wondering what kind of people had built those ships, and why they had vanished. Around midnight, as he stepped outside for air, the wind carried a low hum across the frozen plain. The sound wasn't coming from the machinery or generators, and it came from the ships. The lights along their hulls flickered faintly, as if whispering to one another. Kareem walked closer, stopping a few meters away from the nearest vessel. The air felt warmer there, almost gentle against his face. He placed his hand on the smooth surface of the metal, and at that moment, something incredible happened. The symbols beneath his palm began to glow. The light spread slowly, forming a wave that traveled across the ship's body. His heart pounded as the ground trembled softly. Then, in the faint wind, he heard a sound, not mechanical, but a voice deep and distant, speaking in a language that felt ancient yet strangely familiar. He couldn't understand the words, but their tone carried emotion, sorrow, longing, remembrance. The glow faded after a few seconds, leaving him breathless. He stumbled back, shaken. Whatever these ships were, they weren't dead relics. They were aware. The next morning, the team detected another series of radio pulses, faint but structured. The pattern matched the earlier global signal, but this time it carried a variation that translated into repeated sequences resembling words. After hours of decoding, they managed to extract a simple phrase, "We remember." Those two words left everyone silent. The phrase didn't come from any known human frequency, nor did it match any background cosmic signal. It was coming from beneath the ice, from the ships themselves. Governments across the world began reacting quietly. Satellites focused on Antarctica. Some countries declared restricted airspace over the region. News reporters tried to find out what was happening, but officials denied everything. Inside the base, tension grew. The researchers were no longer just scientists. They were witnesses to something beyond history. Some began to believe the fleet had been built by an ancient civilization that reached heights of technology far beyond modern understanding. A civilization wiped out by disaster, leaving only these silent guardians frozen beneath time. Kareem's research began uncovering more clues. The inscriptions on the ships described something called the last stand of the Skylords. The words sent chills down his spine. He imagined a time long before humanity, a world of great cities and powerful machines, and a final war that ended it all. Perhaps this fleet had been built as a last defense. Perhaps it had been waiting ever since, locked in the ice until the world became ready again. But ready for what? As days passed, small phenomena began to spread beyond Antarctica. Strange lights appeared over the Southern Ocean. Navigation systems in nearby ships failed briefly, and animals across the region behaved oddly. Whales changing direction, birds flying in circles, magnetic compasses twisting wildly. It was as if the planet itself was reacting to the fleet's awakening. One night, while everyone was asleep, Kareem was woken by a bright flash of light outside his tent. He rushed out to see one of the smaller ships glowing intensely. A narrow beam of blue light scanned the sky, slowly turning across the horizon. The ice around it cracked loudly, releasing steam that rose into the freezing air. The soldiers aimed their rifles, but the commanding officer stopped them. They all watched in silence as the beam flickered and vanished. Moments later, the ship released a low sound. a tone that vibrated through the ground. The air shimmered faintly, and then the entire fleet pulsed once in perfect unison. The lights dimmed again and the world went quiet. Kareem realized that the ships were not attacking or defending. They were searching for something or someone. He couldn't explain how he knew, but deep in his mind it felt like they were reaching out. Perhaps to the descendants of those who once built them. Maybe to warn, maybe to remind. He spent the next day studying the patterns again, and his conclusion was chilling. The pulse frequencies matched ancient seismic data from the Earth's crust. The fleet was communicating not just through the air but through the planet itself. It was speaking to the Earth. By then, some of the scientists had started calling the site the heart of the forgotten world. Kareem wrote in his journal that night, "Maybe these ships are not here to destroy or conquer. Maybe they were never meant for war at all. Maybe they were left behind to awaken when the world was in danger again." As he closed his notebook, a soft vibration passed through the floor of his tent, and far away the ships pulsed faintly, a gentle rhythm, like an answer to his thoughts. He stepped outside once more, looking across the icy field where the fleet rested quietly. The sky above was filled with shifting colors of the aurora, glowing brighter than he had ever seen. For a long time he stood there, feeling both small and connected, as if the world's oldest memory was trying to speak through the wind. The forgotten fleet was not silent anymore. It was remembering, and somewhere deep beneath the ice something else was beginning to awaken with it. For days, the world's attention unknowingly hung over the frozen continent. The rest of humanity carried on with life, unaware that something ancient and powerful was stirring below the ice, something that could change everything. At the Antarctic base, tension had become a constant companion. The researchers worked day and night, their faces pale from exhaustion and cold. Soldiers patrolled the perimeter silently, their eyes scanning the icy horizon, though no one knew exactly what they were guarding against anymore. Dr. Kareem had barely slept. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw those ships glowing faintly in the distance, their lights pulsing like living hearts. The sound of that deep vibration had become part of him now. He could feel it even when it wasn't there, like a rhythm beneath the surface of the world. Each morning, new readings came in, magnetic fields shifting, energy levels spiking. Something beneath the ice was growing stronger. One night, while Kareem sat in the control tent reviewing data, a power surge flickered through the camp. Lights blinked, monitors died, and for a moment everything went silent. Outside, the wind stopped blowing. Then came a low humming sound. Not loud, but deep enough to make the ground vibrate. Everyone rushed out of their tents. Far beyond the camp, the largest ship was glowing again, brighter than ever before. Its light reached the clouds, painting them silver and blue. The ice around it cracked loudly, sending tremors across the plain. "It's waking again," someone whispered. Slowly, the ship's massive surface began to shift. What looked like solid metal unfolded, revealing inner layers that shimmered like liquid light. Steam and frost lifted into the air as ancient mechanisms came alive after 1,000,000 years. The soldiers took positions, but no one dared to shoot. The scientists could only watch in awe and fear. Kareem's heart pounded as the ship released a second pulse, a deep wave that rippled through the ice. The smaller vessels nearby responded instantly, their lights syncing to the same rhythm. Within seconds, the entire fleet was glowing in unison, forming a pattern across the landscape like a constellation come to life. It was breathtaking and terrifying. Then, suddenly, the light faded, leaving behind silence. Only the soft crackling of ice remained. The researchers hurried back to their instruments, trying to make sense of what they had witnessed. The energy readings were off the charts and higher than anything recorded before. Some believed the fleet was preparing to launch. Others thought it was trying to communicate. But Kareem felt something different. To him, it didn't feel like an attack or a signal. It felt like the fleet was testing, stretching after a long sleep, remembering how to breathe again. Later that night, he walked alone toward the nearest ship. The air was still, the stars sharp and cold above. As he approached, the ground beneath him hummed faintly. He could feel warmth seeping through his boots, the ice melting slowly beneath the vessel's heat. He stopped a few meters away, staring up at the towering shape. Its surface reflected the moonlight like dark glass. For a moment, he thought he saw shapes moving within the metal, shadows that seemed alive like memories trapped inside. He whispered softly, "Why did you wake up now?" The ship remained silent, but somewhere deep inside it, a faint flicker of blue light moved, like an answer too quiet to hear. Over the next few days, the camp turned into chaos. Satellite communication started failing. Equipment malfunctioned without warning. Radios filled with static that carried faint rhythmic tones, similar to the ship's pulse. One morning, a scientist discovered that the pulse wasn't random. It followed the Earth's rotation, matching magnetic alignments at precise intervals. Whatever the fleet was doing, it was connecting to the planet itself. When this data reached the International Command, the response was immediate. More teams were sent. Heavy transport planes brought new equipment. Drones were launched to monitor the fleet from above, and yet the more they studied, the less they understood. The fleet's energy readings matched no known source, neither nuclear nor solar. It seemed to draw power directly from the planet's magnetic field, as if feeding on the Earth's lifeblood. As tension grew, arguments broke out among the teams. Some wanted to shut the site down and retreat. Others believed it was humanity's greatest discovery, a gift from the ancient past that must be understood. Kareem stood between both sides. His instincts told him that the ships were not dangerous, at least not yet. They were waiting for something important. One night, while reviewing the pulse patterns again, Kareem made a breakthrough. By layering multiple data sets together, he discovered that the signals weren't just energy bursts. They were a form of structured communication. When translated into sound waves, the pulses formed harmonic tones almost like music. He played the sequence aloud through the bass speakers. The sound that filled the tent was haunting, deep, slow, and strangely beautiful. The air seemed to vibrate with it. For a moment, everyone stopped moving, listening in silence. "It's singing," one of the team members murmured. Kareem nodded slowly, or remembering. After that, the tone replayed every 12 hours and precisely timed like a heartbeat. Each cycle grew slightly louder. Something about it stirred emotions in people. Even the soldiers began to feel uneasy, some dreaming of cities made of light, of skies filled with strange crafts moving silently. Others reported hearing voices calling from beneath the ice. The psychological pressure started affecting everyone. The cold, the long nights, and the sound. It was changing the mood of the entire camp. But Kareem remained calm. He had started to feel a quiet understanding forming between him and the fleet. When he listened to the sound, it no longer felt alien. It felt like home, like the Earth itself was trying to speak through it. Then on the 7th day, the unexpected happened. A bright flash appeared on the horizon. It wasn't lightning. It came from below the ice. The ground trembled violently, knocking people to their knees. Instruments fell, tents collapsed, and sirens wailed. The largest ship began to rise. Slowly, impossibly, it lifted off the ice, hovering several meters above ground. A deep hum filled the air, strong enough to make the snow dance in circular patterns. Everyone stood frozen in disbelief. The ship tilted slightly, its glowing underbelly revealing hundreds of patterns that moved like circuits. Then beams of light shot out from its surface, scanning across the landscape as if searching for something. The other ships responded. One by one, they began to rise, forming a formation across the sky. It was both magnificent and frightening. Kareem felt tears in his eyes. "They're not machines," he whispered. "They're alive." The ships floated silently, their lights pulsing in rhythm with one another. Then the largest vessel released a low sound that echoed across the sky. A deep, emotional tone that seemed to carry memory, sadness, and hope all at once. Suddenly, images flashed across the scientists' monitors, symbols, shapes, and glimpses of vast cities made of crystal and light, ancient oceans, towering structures, and finally, war. Skies filled with fire and destruction. The vision ended with a single image, the same fleet sinking beneath the sea, vanishing into the dark. When it was over, the ships gently descended, returning to rest above the ice. The lights faded once again. For a long time, no one spoke. They all knew they had seen something impossible, a message from a civilization that once ruled this planet long before humans. A civilization that fought, fell, and chose to sleep beneath time itself. That night, Kareem wrote in his journal, "They are not here to harm us. They are here because they remembered us. They were waiting for the world to be ready, to remember them too. Outside, the aurora danced brighter than ever, wrapping the sky in curtains of green and violet light. The fleet slept again, but now the earth itself seemed different, alive, aware. Kareem looked across the frozen plains, knowing deep down that this was only the beginning. The awakening was not over. The world had just taken its first step into remembering a history far older than humanity itself. And somewhere in that endless ice, beneath the silence, a final pulse began to rise again, slow, deep, and full of meaning. It was not the end. It was the beginning of the return. Days turned into weeks, and the world above Antarctica continued to live in quiet ignorance, unaware that beneath the frozen layers of time, the planet's deepest secret was slowly unfolding. After the fleet's rise and the mysterious vision, global silence surrounded the entire event. The government sealed off the area completely. New walls, new codes, and more soldiers arrived. The base turned into a fortress. No one could enter or leave without clearance. Inside, the scientists worked in quiet fear. The once open research camp had become a guarded mystery. Even Kareem had lost track of time. Sleep came rarely, and dreams often carried him back to the same images: cities made of light, oceans full of energy, skies burning with war. Yet despite the fear, a strange calm had also settled. The fleet had gone still again, resting peacefully like giants asleep beneath the stars. Only the faint hum remained, soft, steady, and somehow comforting. Kareem often stood alone near the edge of the ice field at night, looking at the ships that lay scattered like monuments of forgotten gods. Their surfaces glowed faintly in the moonlight, whispering ancient secrets no one could yet understand. He had stopped thinking of them as machines long ago. To him, they felt like memories, the last pieces of something great that had once existed and refused to be erased. Then, one morning, a storm began to form, one stronger than anyone had ever seen in Antarctica. The sky darkened and the temperature dropped suddenly. Winds tore through the camp, breaking tents and toppling equipment. The snow turned wild, spinning in violent circles. At first, they thought it was just another polar storm, but then the readings changed. Magnetic interference spiked and deep tremors began to shake the ground. "The ships!" someone shouted. Everyone rushed outside despite the freezing wind. Lightning cracked across the sky, but it wasn't normal lightning. It was blue, glowing brighter with each strike. The air itself vibrated with energy. The fleet began to glow again. One by one, their lights turned on. Not randomly this time, but in perfect harmony. It was as if the storm had triggered something buried deep inside them. Kareem shielded his eyes as the largest vessel released a strong beam into the clouds. The light split the storm in half, clearing a path straight into the sky. Snow and wind swirled around the beam but couldn't touch it. Then, as everyone watched in disbelief, the beam began to spread outward, connecting with the other ships. Within moments, the entire ice plain was covered in lines of blue light, forming shapes too perfect to be natural. Ancient symbols glowing beneath the snow. Kareem's voice trembled as he whispered, "It's a network. They're connecting." The air grew warmer despite the storm. The ice melted faster, steam rising from the cracks. Beneath the surface, something massive was moving. Not one ship, not a single piece of machinery, but something much larger. The ground began to shake harder. Ice cracked like thunder. Everyone ran back, staring as the land itself seemed to breathe. Then, from deep below, another structure began to emerge, larger than all the ships combined. Its surface shone like dark glass, covered in markings that pulsed with golden light. The fleet had not been the beginning. It was only a part of something far greater. The researchers gasped as the ice fell away, revealing what looked like a massive platform, or perhaps a city. Towers and domes of strange metal emerged from the frozen ground, glistening in the stormlight. It was like watching history rise from the dead. The ground vibrations slowed, replaced by a steady pulse. The same rhythm they had heard for weeks, only louder now, deeper, stronger. Kareem fell to his knees, overwhelmed by the sight. He didn't see it as a threat. He saw it as a message, one final memory rising from time itself. As the wind began to calm, the ships hovered slightly above the ground, their lights now steady and soft. The storm vanished as quickly as it had come, leaving a strange silence behind. The sky above turned clear, revealing stars that seemed brighter than ever. For the first time in weeks, there was peace. Then came a sound, a soft, echoing tone, almost like a song. It filled the air, not loud, but deep enough to touch the heart. The lights across the ships began to flicker in patterns. The scientists realized the signals were repeating, forming shapes and symbols that matched ancient constellations. It was as if the fleet was telling a story, and it was. Through the patterns, through the sounds, they began to understand. It spoke of an ancient world, a civilization born when the earth was young, a people who mastered energy, not from machines but from nature itself. They lived in harmony with the planet, guiding its balance, but then something went wrong. A great conflict tore their world apart. Their power turned against them, and their civilization fell into the sea. The fleet had been built in the final days, not as weapons but as memory vessels. Each one carried the knowledge and essence of their world, hidden away beneath the ice, waiting for a time when the earth could remember them again. It wasn't war that had brought them back. It was the planet itself, awakening them as a reminder. Kareem listened, tears freezing on his face. It all made sense now. The pulses, the storms, the magnetic waves. The fleet had been reaching out, not to attack, but to reconnect. Suddenly, one of the ships released a narrow beam of light that touched the ground near Kareem. Slowly, he stepped closer. Inside the light, tiny symbols floated, spinning gently in the air. He reached out, and as his hand entered the beam, the symbols glowed brighter. In that moment, an image filled his mind, a brief but powerful vision. He saw an ancient world full of peace and beauty, shining cities built beside oceans and skies filled with light. Then he saw darkness, a great wave swallowing everything. When he opened his eyes, the beam faded and silence returned. He stood there trembling, his heart full of emotions he couldn't explain. It wasn't fear, it was connection. It felt like the past itself had touched him. He whispered softly, "You're not forgotten anymore." And for a moment he swore he heard a reply, not in words, but in feeling. A quiet sense of relief, of peace, as if the ships themselves understood. The fleet remained still for hours after that. The energy slowly faded until only the faint blue glow remained. The giant structure below the ice stopped moving, settling back into silence. The next morning, when the sun rose, everything looked calm. The sky was clear, the snow reflected gold, and the air felt lighter, warmer, somehow alive. The scientists recorded the final readings. All signals from the fleet had stopped. It was as if the awakening had ended, but something in the air had changed. The compasses pointed differently. The magnetic fields around the region had shifted permanently. It was as if the earth itself had adjusted slightly, like taking a deep breath after a long sleep. Kareem stood alone at the edge of the site, watching the horizon. The ships now rested quietly beneath the snow again, their light hidden but never gone. He knew they hadn't disappeared. They had simply gone back to rest and were their purpose fulfilled. He turned back toward the camp. The storm had taken down much of their equipment, but the people had changed too. They were no longer just scientists or soldiers. They had all seen something that would stay with them forever. A reminder that history wasn't just what books told. It was what the Earth remembered. Before leaving Antarctica, Kareem took one last look at the frozen field. The wind brushed softly across his face, carrying that same deep hum he had heard on the first day. He smiled faintly. Somewhere beneath that endless ice, the forgotten fleet waited, timeless, silent, and alive. Not as weapons, not as ghosts, but as guardians of memory. Maybe one day, far in the future, when humanity needed to remember again, they would awaken once more. For now, the world above carried on, unaware that below their feet, a million-year-old secret slept peacefully, holding the story of a time when the Earth itself had spoken through steel and light. And in the calm silence of Antarctica, as the aurora shimmered across the sky, a single pulse, soft and gentle, passed through the ice one last time. It was the fleet's final whisper to the world.